The war was over. Germany had surrendered. But even as the world celebrated the fall of the Third Reich, a new and silent war had already begun. In hidden rooms across Washington and Moscow, men in suits were already asking a dangerous question. What do we do with the Nazi scientists? These weren't ordinary men. They were the minds behind Hitler's rockets, nerve gas, and experimental aircraft, technology years ahead of its time. Some of them had built the V-2 missiles that rained terror on London. Others had tested new ways to reach the edge of space. They were brilliant, and they were monsters. But brilliance in the new Cold War was a currency too valuable to waste. The United States, terrified that the Soviets would seize these same geniuses, decided to act first. In 1945, under the cover of darkness, a secret program was born, Operation Paperclip. Its mission was simple: locate, extract, and recruit Germany's top scientists before the Russians could. The rules of morality were rewritten overnight. War criminals became assets. Convicted Nazis were given new names, clean papers, and a second life in America. Officially, the program didn't exist. There were no headlines, no records, and no oversight. Planes quietly ferried scientists from Germany to secret U.S. bases. Among them was Wernher von Braun, the man behind the deadly V-2 rocket, who would soon lead America's journey to the moon. But no one was told that his rockets had been built by slaves, thousands of prisoners who died underground in the Mittelwerk tunnels. In the ashes of Berlin, U.S. Army intelligence officers scoured bombed laboratories and empty castles, searching for blueprints, formulas, and mines that could give America an edge. Each discovery was a race against the Soviets. Every document, every vial, every scientist, a prize in the greatest intellectual manhunt in history. What started as a secret rescue soon became a moral compromise. How many crimes could be erased for the sake of progress? Could justice be traded for power? As cargo planes lifted off from Germany, carrying the men who once served the Reich, few realized that America's scientific future and its deepest moral scar were both aboard those flights. The Cold War would be shaped not just by bombs and borders, but by the ghost of World War II. Ghost America had willingly brought home. This was the birth of Operation Paperclip. In the ruins of Germany, the war had ended, but a new kind of battlefield had taken shape. It was no longer fought with bullets or tanks. This war was fought with intelligence, science, and secrets, and the prize was nothing less than the future of the world. The United States Army dispatched a special team, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or JIOA. Their mission was simple in words, but impossible in ethics: identify and recruit German scientists before the Soviet Union could claim them. These officers were not looking for soldiers, they were looking for geniuses. Men who knew how to build rockets, engineer advanced aircraft, and design chemical weapons that could change warfare forever. In bombed-out laboratories and half-destroyed universities, American agents began their hunt. They sifted through piles of burned documents, shattered machines, and abandoned blueprints. Every scrap of paper could hold the key to a new weapon or a new world. But along with science, they found something darker: the trail of experiments on human beings, the traces of war crimes, and the signatures of men who had served the Nazi regime with loyalty and cruelty. Still, orders were clear: get them before the Russians do. The moral debate could wait. As long as a scientist had knowledge that could benefit America's military or technology, his past was temporarily irrelevant. Hundreds of German engineers, doctors, and technicians were quietly rounded up. They were told that their skills were needed for research purposes. In truth, they were being traded: freedom for knowledge, immunity for genius. Files were rewritten, Nazi party records were scrubbed clean, and new identities were born overnight. Some even had their SS backgrounds erased with a single stamp. Meanwhile, Soviet agents were closing in. Entire trainloads of German scientists and machinery were being shipped to Russia under Operation Soviet-Kim, the Soviet counterpart to Paperclip. Both sides raced to strip Germany of its brains, piece by piece. Among the scientists caught in the storm was Wernher von Braun, the ambitious rocket engineer who dreamed not of war, but of space. Captured by American troops in Bavaria, he offered his loyalty to the U.S. in exchange for safety and for the continuation of his work. He and his team were soon transported to Fort Bliss, Texas, where they began rebuilding the V-2 rocket program under American supervision. In time, von Braun's designs would evolve into the rockets that launched America's first satellites, and eventually, men to the moon. But few Americans knew that the father of NASA's space program once wore the black uniform of the SS. Not all scientists under Paperclip were rocket experts. Some worked in aviation, inventing jet engines far ahead of their time. Others brought chemical and biological warfare research, knowledge extracted through unspeakable human experiments in Nazi camps. They were protected, paid, and even celebrated. By the late 1940s, America's secret scientists had settled into their new lives. Some lived under aliases, others openly under their real names, protected by classified government files that erased their Nazi past. They were no longer fugitives, they were employees of the United States government, and their work had just begun. At remote military bases across America, something extraordinary and deeply unsettling was happening. German engineers who once built weapons for Hitler were now building rockets for Washington. The U.S. Army had created new test facilities in New Mexico and Texas, where the desert sky became a playground for German-made missiles. Locals in small towns often saw strange lights streaking across the night sky, unaware that those flashes were born from the same designs that once terrorized London. The Vita rocket, a weapon of destruction, was now reborn as a tool of discovery. Wernher von Braun's team conducted hundreds of launches under the guidance of the U.S. military. They tested flight control, fuel systems, and altitude records, all in preparation for something bigger. The dream of space exploration had begun. But in the shadows, not all experiments were aimed at the stars. Some of the scientists recruited under Operation Paperclip were placed in projects that remained top secret, experiments involving chemical and biological agents, human endurance, and psychological warfare. These programs were scattered across military labs and medical research centers, hidden under layers of classification. The official goal was defense, understanding the limits of the human mind and body in case of Soviet attacks. But in truth, some of the work mirrored the same horrors once seen in Nazi camps. Declassified documents decades later revealed shocking details. Nazi doctors who had performed experiments on concentration camp prisoners were now advising on research related to hypothermia, high altitude, and chemical exposure, supposedly for scientific progress. They argued that their experience, however horrific, could not be wasted. And America, eager for an advantage, looked the other way. Meanwhile, the CIA began to take interest in what these men knew. The 1950s saw the birth of Project MKUltra, a dark chapter in Cold War history. Its mission was mind control, using drugs, hypnosis, and sensory manipulation to break and rebuild human consciousness. While not all paperclip scientists were directly involved, their earlier research in psychology, neurochemistry, and interrogation techniques paved the way for such projects. In this strange alliance between democracy and darkness, morality was redefined by necessity. The same nation that had fought tyranny now employed those who once served it. To justify this, officials said the scientists were just following orders, that their knowledge was too valuable to lose. It was a convenient lie that kept the wheels of progress turning. By the mid-1950s, the world was changing again. The ruins of war had given birth to a new conflict, not over land or politics, but over the skies above. The Cold War had become a race for space, and the men once loyal to Hitler were now at the center of humanity's greatest leap forward. In a quiet desert base called White Sands Proving Ground, the echo of rockets filled the air. German scientists worked alongside American engineers, translating their wartime designs into new technology. The Vita rocket had evolved longer, faster, reaching higher altitudes than anyone had imagined. What had once been a weapon of terror was now the blueprint for exploration. At the heart of it all stood Wernher von Braun. Brilliant, ambitious, and endlessly driven, von Braun became the face of America's new rocket dream. He envisioned not just missiles, but moon landings, not destruction, but discovery. His team's knowledge, born in the darkness of Nazi Germany, was now shaping the dawn of the space age. But the Soviets were not far behind. In 1957, the world gasped as Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, soared into orbit. The beeping signal that circled the Earth was more than a scientific triumph. It was a message of domination. America, the self-proclaimed leader of freedom, had been beaten to space, and by the very scientists it feared most. The U.S. government reacted with panic and pride. Funds poured into new agencies, research exploded overnight, and in 1958, NASA was born. Von Braun and his team were transferred to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, where they were told to do one thing: catch up, and then lead. And so, the race for the heavens began in earnest. Rockets roared from Cape Canaveral, each launch reaching further than the last. America's Redstone and Jupiter missiles, built with the minds of former Nazis, became the backbone of its defense and its dream of spaceflight. Television screens across the country showed images of fire, smoke, and triumph, but few viewers knew that the engineers behind those rockets once wore swastikas on their uniforms. As the 1960s approached, von Braun's ambition reached new heights. He spoke openly of sending men to the moon, building space stations, and exploring Mars. To the public, he was a visionary scientist, a national hero. To historians, he was a paradox, a man whose genius was undeniable, and whose past could never be forgotten. While von Braun reached for the stars, others under Operation Paperclip contributed in quieter, darker ways. Some worked on ballistic missile programs, designing weapons capable of carrying nuclear warheads across continents. Others refined jet propulsion, radar systems, and guidance technology that would define modern warfare. Their work was progress, but progress built on silence. Behind the success, unease lingered in Washington. Some officials questioned how men with blood on their hands had become the architects of America's glory. When the Apollo missions ended, America stood taller than ever before. The flag on the moon shimmered in silent triumph, proof that humanity could rise beyond the limits of Earth. But beneath that victory, buried in classified archives and fading memories, lay a truth far more complicated. Operation Paperclip had changed the world, but it had also changed America. By the 1970s, whispers about the program began to surface. Journalists, historians, and survivors of the war started asking questions the government had avoided for decades. How many Nazi scientists had been brought to the U.S.? What crimes had been ignored? And why had so much been hidden in plain sight? Slowly, documents were declassified. Names once buried in secrecy emerged: Arthur Rudolph, Hubert Strughold, Kurt Blome, men who had been accused of war crimes, yet lived freely under American protection. Rudolph had overseen the metalwork factory where slave laborers died building rockets. He later directed NASA's Saturn V program. Strughold, known as the father of space medicine, had allegedly overseen medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. And Blome, accused of testing plague and nerve agents, later advised U.S. biological research. Each revelation peeled away the illusion that Paperclip was just a scientific endeavor. It was, in truth, a moral bargain, progress purchased with silence. For decades, American officials defended the program as a necessity of the Cold War. They argued that without those scientists, the Soviet Union might have dominated the skies, built superior weapons, or even reached the moon first. It was an argument that made sense on paper, but felt hollow when measured against the suffering their work had caused. As survivors of Nazi atrocities aged, some began to speak out. They were shocked to learn that the men who once stood behind their tormentors' experiments had been celebrated as heroes in another land. For them, Paperclip was not progress, it was betrayal. A reminder that justice, when weighed against power, often loses. By the 1980s, the story could no longer be hidden. Television documentaries, leaked CIA papers, and public outrage forced the U.S. government to acknowledge the truth. Yes, Nazi scientists had been recruited. Yes, their past had been erased. And yes, their work had become part of the foundation of modern America's military, space, and scientific achievements. Even today, traces of Operation Paperclip remain woven into history. The rockets that carried astronauts into orbit, the medicine that saved lives, the technology that shaped our digital age, all bear the fingerprints of that secret deal. It is a legacy both brilliant and tainted, a reminder that human progress often comes with a hidden cost. When Wernher von Braun died in 1977, his tombstone bore a Bible verse: "The heavens declare the glory of God." It was a fitting tribute to a man who reached for the stars.